Hi everyone, today I'd like to talk about player customization and cosmetics. Not only why customization is fun, but also important. We're going to discuss why player skins, wearables, and other cosmetic items, contrary to popular sentiment, not only affect gameplay, but also that by restricting them through paywalls or retention models, what is being restricted is gameplay. Additionally, much of what we're going to discuss today overlaps with games industry monetization in general. When I began writing this script, I wanted to focus on the monetization of cosmetics specifically, but the more I wrote, the more difficult it became to separate the monetization of cosmetic items with games industry monetization in general. So while I will focus on cosmetics and why they're an important part of gameplay, a lot of what I'm going to say, as well as some of the counter-arguments we'll address later, deal with more general monetization in games. Before we get much further though, I would like to make clear a few disclaimers. Disclaimer 1. When it comes to video games, people should be free to spend whatever money they want on games. People should not be criticized, let alone harassed, for spending money. Today, more people with increasingly more diverse backgrounds play more video games than ever before, and how people approach and conceptualize playing a video game is just as diverse. We will talk about this more later, but to put it plainly, while battle passes and microtransactions are controversial, the solution to games industry greed is not to point fingers at the people who buy microtransactions or purchase battle passes. Disclaimer 2. Cosmetics and customization are two words that can mean a lot of things, and in some instances might mean two distinct things. Some people may consider things like player skins or outfits cosmetics, while customization brings to mind objects that exist beyond the player character in a game's world. Some people, for instance, may not consider an emote a cosmetic option as much as it is a customization option. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use the word cosmetics as a broader catch-all term, meaning things that can be customized or personalized. That is definitely broad, but so too are the ways live service economies monetize customization and personalization, whether it's through free-to-play games, battle passes, or direct purchases. So, to begin, I'm going to reiterate that cosmetics are gameplay. They are not an unimportant or tangential part of a game's experience. The implementation and look of cosmetics can be good and can be bad. They are an element of a game that should be discussed and critiqued just like we discuss combat mechanics, dialogue, and animations. No one would deny that art direction is a major element of games, wholly open to interpretation and criticism, and cosmetics are a part of that. Beyond art direction, though, cosmetics can incentivize interaction. They can give you goals and things to work toward or build, reasons to play a game. Lately, I've been playing Everspace 2. It's very good. Cosmetics in Everspace 2 are hidden throughout the world, or at least the local star cluster, and can't be purchased at shops, which makes them relatively uncommon. To net a large amount of paint and design options for your ship, you have to explore and complete side activities. This makes finding cosmetic options in Everspace 2 exciting, and it generates a feeling that your ships are actually yours. New weapons, sensors, and shields are expendable, upgraded all the time, but customizing how your ship looks creates a deeper level of connection, one that's patiently developed over time as you play. Personally, after finding dark green and the right cockpit variant, I turned my ship into a mini Klingon bird of prey, which I think is pretty awesome. Kapla! Outside monetization, how games should or should not handle cosmetics is a discussion unto itself. Getting all these colors and ship designs in Everspace 2 took me time. There definitely was a bit of a grind. In other games, like Ghost of Tsushima, cosmetics are tied to stat boosts or player abilities, so what your character wears might be influenced more by how you want to play than how you want to look. I believe there are legitimate rationalities behind how games handle their cosmetic and customization options, whether a game has it behind a grind or whether there's a wealth of customization options from the very beginning. Regardless of implementation though, cosmetics are a part of a game's experience. They help uphold and create the illusion of a persistent world and nurture a sense of individuality. In Elite Dangerous, not every space station has every type of module for your ship. Some stations have cheap, low-quality modules, while other stations have expensive, high-end modules. It's all part of a living in-game economy, interstellar commerce that may determine which stars you regularly visit and which stars you call home. Unfortunately, cosmetics in Elite exist outside this really cool, simulated galactic economy. You can purchase cosmetics directly from Frontier's website or with ARX, Elite's in-game currency, which you can purchase directly or slowly gain by playing. Elite, being a massive, emergent MMO, creates stories, and to tell you some of the stuff that I've done in Elite would kind of like be telling you my story. My ASP explorer Faraday and I have traveled hundreds of thousands of light years all over the galaxy. I've been to Bernard's Loop, black holes, the Bubble Nebula, and fought off ancient Guardian drones to get this handy FSD booster. I even spent a little time as a fuel rat, saving stranded players after they ran out of fuel. And most, if not all, of that time, I had this paint job, which I really like. But unlike everything else in the game, this paint job just came from a web store. A much less interesting and endearing memory than everything else I've done in the game. It's a bit of a shame, because what if these paint jobs could only be found in certain parts of Elite's galaxy? What if the way players customize their ships didn't just show off their personality and taste, but also told a story about where they've been and what they've done? Personalization, identity, and self-expression are important in games. Through them, we create memories, not just memories of what happened in a game, but memories of how we personally experienced a game. There are probably thousands of people who played as an elf in Dragon Age Inquisition. Fewer people played as a female elven warrior. Even fewer as a female elven warrior with black hair and red face tattoos. And even fewer as a female elven warrior with black hair, red face tattoos, and a custom-crafted axe they named in honor of their favorite weapon from Bloodborne. My memory, nostalgia, and enjoyment of Inquisition includes the story and characters I spent time with, but also the things I created. That part of the world is mine. It's personal. None of this is to say that all games need cosmetics or that games without cosmetics are somehow lesser. One of the strengths of video games as a medium and art form is its diversity, fluidity, and variety. Player cosmetics and personalization are a powerful and meaningful tool for the medium, but that doesn't mean they're a good fit for every game or a good fit for every developer's vision. Self-expression can also serve more than creativity and goal creation, though. It also has aesthetic and roleplay value. In Ghost of Tsushima, you can't change the way Jin looks, but you can choose what he wears. For most of my playthrough, I went with the Ronin attire, which I thought contrasted nicely with the bulky armor of Jin's 13th century Mongolian enemies. When attacking a Mongolian base, I didn't sneak over rooftops and stealthily take out the guards. I walked right up to the front of the gate and initiated a standoff. I ignored Jin's other outfits and equipment because I thought role-playing a dressed-down samurai taking out highly armored bad guys was really cool. I understood in my head that my cosmetic and gameplay choices weren't making a difference to Ghost of Tsushima's story, but that wasn't the point. I made those choices for myself, for my own enjoyment, and nothing else. By normalizing cosmetics as separate from gameplay, we allow them to become considered secondary or unimportant when they're not. And as more games adopt service-based models of monetization, cosmetics become less about self-expression and creativity and more about psychological manipulation, retention, and FOMO. Social spaces, many awkwardly wedged into their games, exist only to showcase the cosmetics that other players have purchased. Here, social interaction and emergent gameplay is not the goal. Instead, the intent is more closely related to browsing a storefront. One particularly bad offender in this case is Halo Infinite. Throughout the series' life, Halo's multiplayer, among other games, became famous for coloring players' armor to match their team. There is an entire long-running and very famous web series about it. As the series progressed, players got more options to customize their armor, but the colors in multiplayer matches remained team-specific. In Infinite's case, forcing a change of a player's armor was too much, because colors, like armor pieces, are a part of Infinite's free-to-play, service-based monetization. Infinite, to signify teams during multiplayer matches, places red and blue outlines around players, and when players take damage, their shield reacts by shining in their team's color. Get close enough to another player and you can see their armor, color and all. The outlines and shield shimmers are ugly, regressive, and done solely and completely in the name of monetization. Infinite takes advantage of the natural desire for self-expression, clumsily upends a series tradition in the name of monetization, and ends up looking worse than the games that came before it. To feed the machine of retention, cosmetics are constantly needed to continuously incentivize play, which has led to piles of stuff, just endless stuff that may or may not, and likely doesn't, fit with a game's art style. Browsing battle passes and storefronts, it's hard not to see so much of this stuff as random, artistically incoherent, digital meaninglessness. And a lot of the worth and rarity behind these cosmetics is backed by fabricated value and artificial urgency. Why is the UA ODST chest piece available while the UA SEMA chest piece is currently unavailable? I don't know, but I guess I missed out. If I played more, I guess I wouldn't have to fear missing out. For a period of history, Call of Duty was legitimately innovative. It was different, cutting edge, and interesting. Now Call of Duty has kind of become a parody of itself. Silly and zany cosmetics are not a new thing, and they've been around forever, but they also served purposes, endgame rewards, secrets, or just plain and simply added some fun. Leon's pinstripe suit is cool and also kind of ridiculous, but that's also the point. Resident Evil isn't exactly an entirely serious series, so if you want to do a second playthrough, you can, while also cranking up the silliness. Things should exist in games just to be fun, secret codes and big head modes and the like. But all this, it's not here for fun or enjoyment or fulfillment or challenge. It's here to incentivize recurrent spending. All this variability, all this diversity and color, it has nothing to do with self-expression, creativity, personality, or good game design. It's just retention. Corporate gimmickry. I think we should ask ourselves if this is a version of video games that we really like or want, or if it's even a version of video games that is good. Before we get into specific counterarguments or responses, we do need to talk about games industry economics, which are crazily complex, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an in-and-out expert. We live in a really strange time where game budgets continue to rise, while games are, in some ways, cheaper than ever. Steam has multiple sales a year, so many that if there is a game you want on Steam, regardless of the time of year, you are probably at most just a few months away from seeing it discounted. Microsoft, PlayStation, Epic, EA, Ubisoft, and Amazon, among others, all have services that grant full access to games, including AAA titles, for a relatively low fee, if any fee. How much it costs to make a game is a massively tricky number to nail down, but one number that always pops into my head is $10,000 per person per month, a figure reported by Jason Schreier for Kotaku back in 2017. Is that a 100% accurate number for every single studio and every single game? Probably not. But I'm also in no way going to confidently say that turning a profit on a AA game or indie project is anywhere near easy, especially considering the famous volatility of the games industry. When the UK's Competition and Markets Authority blocked the Microsoft Activision-Blizzard merger, their decision detailed that AAA development budgets near the end of the 2010s could reach between $50 and $150 million, while games that are greenlit today are being approved for budgets of $200 million or more. Sometimes, when reading about development budgets, I wonder how video games are possible at all and if it's even morally defensible to play them. Understanding this climate, I do not believe microtransactions and DLCs are necessarily inherently greedy. There are ways to monetize a game past an entry cost that are completely reasonable and ethical, cosmetics included. I find it extremely difficult to argue that a game like Vampire Survivors, an already cheap game that is seemingly perpetually on sale, is wrong for selling additional characters and DLC packs. As a more in-depth example, let's consider Offworld Interactive, developers of Squad, one of my favorite games of all time. Squad is an ultra-realistic multiplayer military simulator available only for PC. It's a niche title that exists in one market. At full price, Squad is $49.99, and through the years, Offworld Interactive has added maps and playable factions, which include new weapons and vehicles for no additional cost. Recently, Offworld announced and released emotes for Squad, gestures like waving, thumbs up, and others. In the announcement, Offworld said that despite previous leadership saying Squad would never have paid DLC, the studio needs a way to fund the game's future development. The initial reaction was somewhat mixed, and players even brought up Chinese conglomerate Tencent acquiring a minority stake in Offworld just a year prior. At the time, Offworld said it would use the investment to build upon the live services of its successful FPS titles, manage studio growth, and fuel the development of future titles. For us, the question at hand is whether Offworld really needs purchasable emotes in Squad. That may be a simplistic way of looking at it, but without a more intimate knowledge of Offworld's financials, that's also a question I can't comfortably say no to. Now let's contrast Offworld with another company you've definitely heard of before. Disney. Dreamlight Valley is, for all intents and purposes, a Disney Animal Crossing. A life simulator where you interact with famous Disney characters and go fishing and farm and stuff. It may not necessarily be the first time something like this has been attempted, but it is the first time since the massive success of Animal Crossing New Horizons, which released in 2020. Currently in early access, Dreamlight Valley's Founder Edition costs $29.99, with bundles reaching up to $69.98. Dreamlight Valley is slated to eventually release free-to-play with an in-game currency, purchasable cosmetics, and paid game extensions. But how all that turns out doesn't really matter, because the question at hand is whether Dreamlight Valley, a Disney property, really needs that kind of economy in order to be financially viable. New Horizons, by comparison, has loads of cosmetics like wearables, furniture, and more. Creativity and customization are pillars of the New Horizons experience. And when it comes to monetization, New Horizons lacks almost all of what we'd consider modern monetization. So if Nintendo can publish New Horizons as it is and survive, you'd think Disney could treat Dreamlight Valley a similar way. I am perfectly comfortable speculating that Dreamlight Valley could exist and be profitable if it monetized itself similar to how New Horizons does. Does Dreamlight Valley need in-game currency? Do certain cosmetics have to be locked behind a paywall? Does it have to be free to play at all? Probably not. What would be an objectively better game with customization and self-expression disconnected from any real money economy will not exist because the return it would make is not good enough for a massively powerful, multi-billion-dollar IP hoarding megacorporation. And that sucks. As we go through some counter-arguments and responses, I think it's important to keep in mind what we've just discussed, because it is a point that will stay relevant. The games industry absolutely has economic realities, but I also believe there is a line between sustainable business and systemic greed. The first argument we'll take a look at, often used as reassurance, is that cosmetics don't affect gameplay. Sometimes this is said in defense of cosmetics held back by microtransactions in general, and sometimes it's to assuage fears that the additional stuff in battle passes and whatnot won't give players advantages. As I've argued, cosmetics are gameplay. They can change the way you play, change the way you view your character, and give you reasons to play, which, when corrupted, is the entire reason a battle pass exists. If cosmetics didn't affect play, people wouldn't spend so much time customizing stuff in games or asking for transmog systems. In a multiplayer context, cosmetics not giving players advantages is good, but that's also the bare minimum. I mean, a game not being pay to win shouldn't be celebrated as much as it just should be expected. On a related note, you'll occasionally hear something to the effect of, wouldn't you rather have cosmetic microtransactions than microtransactions that give players advantages? Isn't this the better alternative? My answer to this is yes. In a world where we have no choice, if a piece of a multiplayer game has to be put behind some kind of live service economy, then I'd rather it be cosmetic options than items that give players advantages, like more powerful weapons or whatever. But in that case, the question invariably circles back to the necessity of that live service economy. The next few arguments we'll discuss are not necessarily just about cosmetics. They are used to defend barrier to cosmetics, but they also apply to a lot of different types of additional monetization and microtransactions, starting with they're optional. Strictly speaking, this is true. Microtransactions are optional. You don't have to buy them. But the larger question is whether or not they need to be optional. I want this Mark V helmet in Infinite because it's my favorite helmet, and the Spartan I created in Halo Reach 10 years ago also wore a Mark V. I do not need the Mark V to play Infinite. I just think it's cool, and I would like my Spartan more if he wore a Mark V. So yes, the Mark V is optional, but the barriers to acquiring it are in place because Infinite was built around a free-to-play economy. Was that how Infinite's multiplayer needed to be built? Was it impossible for Infinite to exist without it having so many monetization-related barriers between cosmetics and players? I'm going to assume no. I don't have time to play games anymore. Microtransactions save me time. The not having time issue is complex and an issue that some may argue wanders into accessibility. While I do think there are legitimate artistic and design reasons behind grinds and games with long playtimes, like Everspace 2, I'm not here to debate how games should handle those things. For our discussion, if a game has cosmetics that are difficult to get or time-consuming to get, but also has ways to purchase those cosmetics, then it is selling a solution to a problem that it itself created. XP boosts and other similar microtransactions solve a problem that, I imagine, could likely be solved without additional spending. If big publishers like Ubisoft, who barely care about their own employees, are really concerned about the accessibility of their games for people that don't have lots of time, I'm sure it's in their power to find a solution that doesn't require those people pay a fee. Games are too expensive nowadays, and budgets keep rising. Buying cosmetics is a good way to support developers. As we've discussed, the economics of the games industry are complicated and brutal. If purchasing a microtransaction or purchasing a cosmetic for a game helps keep people in jobs and helps keep the game afloat, then that's nothing to scoff at. There are economic realities. Now, specifically why game budgets are continuously rising is an interesting and just as complex question. Some may argue that market forces like consumer demand for cutting-edge visuals and long playtimes are the central cause, or that maintaining the service part of a live service demands a lot of resources. I think it's somewhat debatable that the costs of AAA development are caused by market forces constantly and recklessly pushing for shinier and better. I'm sure there is some truth to that, but market forces are a fickle thing, and we've seen plenty of games over the last few years that go against what we may consider AAA market friendly and are still successful. While supporting developers is noble and well-intentioned, I'm also not sure that games industry economics are always that simple. I feel safe in assuming that the money someone spends on a dude in a rabbit costume doesn't get directly deposited into an artist's bank account. I think if we want to support developers, pushing for better working conditions and holding powerful industry heads accountable for failures, systemic or otherwise, is a better way to do it than a $20 microtransaction. The financial support from which a developer actually gets is abstracted. This is especially true as, sometimes despite record revenues, industry layoffs continue to be a regular occurrence. We should look at game executives and consider whether they really need the compensation they receive, and we should support unionization efforts that will help the games industry become a better, more secure industry to work in. Once we've come to terms with all that, then we can consider whether the only way for the wider games industry to survive is through additional monetization and live service economies. Well, as long as people are buying it, they're going to keep selling it. If people buy it, why can't they sell it? There's demand. I think demand is a poor excuse. These companies know what they're doing, and they know the nuances of demand. In fact, demand is kind of a strong word. I think what we see in the games industry from players is more a willingness to spend money because there's no other way to more easily get the cosmetics and other items kept behind live service barriers. There is not a demand for air conditioning in Arizona as much as there is an unwillingness to die from heat exhaustion. For a better and admittedly less dramatic comparison, I would like to talk about one of the worst companies on earth, the National Football League. Thursday night football is a bad idea. It's inconvenient, sucks for the players, sucks for the teams, sucks for the fans, and has overall been a bad product.
You know, I'm only half kidding, but sometimes a game can be, at least to this point, so bad, it's almost good. You know what I'm saying? No. Okay.
And yet the NFL wants Thursday night football to work. Now, there are various reasons the NFL wants Thursday night football to work, but let's assume the NFL pushed all those controversies aside and simply said, but fans watch it. Viewers are telling us they want games on Thursday nights. This is a disingenuous argument. I think people, when they decide to do something, do not consider the impact of their decision on a larger market or on some macroeconomic scale. People get home from work on Thursday night, they cook dinner, take care of their families, and then they relax the rest of the evening by turning on the TV and watching a football game. They do not get home, and before watching Thursday night football, study the quality of Thursday night games and matchups, ponder whether an NFL game plan can effectively be installed in a short week of practice. Consider the effect flex scheduling has on players as well as fans who set plans to attend a game perhaps months in advance, and then decide to watch or not watch the game based on the message they're watching or not watching will do to the overall product of professional football. So when people buy microtransactions, are they considering the larger effects that their purchases have on the economics of the massively complex billion-dollar games industry? No. Should they have to? No. Does the industry understand this? Yes. Again, the questions we should ask ourselves, as well as game companies, are 1, whether or not those economies are needed to create sustainable businesses, and 2, whether people would prefer to have cosmetics freely available or available through play rather than behind paywalls or other live service economic walls. While I think many of the service-based monetization schemes around today probably don't need to exist for their host companies to exist, I do think it's important to concede that, on some level, we can't expect the industry to just stop its push toward service-based gaming. This isn't because service-based gaming makes the best games, it doesn't, but because the infrastructure is too entrenched for things to suddenly change. EA's Ultimate Team, a pay-to-win mode in its sports games, made $1.62 billion during EA's 2021 fiscal year. Ultimate Team is predatory, unethical, wrong, and just plain sucks, but it also represents a big chunk of EA's annual business. I imagine ripping that away from EA would probably not be a great solution and would likely cause collateral damage to developers and other EA employees. EA should still be criticized for creating the Ultimate Team monster, but it is a very big financial monster.
I told you we're way past rules. We have been for some time now. I start having rules now, everything we built collapses.
Economics aside, what we can be certain of is that battle passes and cosmetic microtransactions do not exist to make better games or build a better games industry. And if they did, you'd think we'd be seeing more progress on that point than we have. Why cosmetics have become so associated with additional purchases now is to incentivize retention and recurrent spending. It's as base as that. It's about keeping players in an ecosystem recurrently spending money while hoping that a small number of those players disproportionately outspend the rest. The industry may not want to use the term whales anymore, but I'd be cautious to allow the industry to cover its own tracks with its own euphemisms. I think as media, content creators, and players, we should endlessly question whether microtransactions, cosmetic or not, are actually necessary. We should want the industry to avoid monetization schemes and point out that free-to-play economies are not entirely ethical nor fun. Games are best when cosmetics are not separated from the experience, and I also think that's clearly the better version of video games that most people want. As the history of video games rolls on, do we really want an entire element of gameplay so heavily relegated to forces outside the creative and gameplay process? I assume not. And we should remember that the industry, on some level, knows all this. They know they make unpopular decisions and that the arguments that they make are disingenuous. They just don't really care. If it were up to the Bobby Koticks and Andrew Wilsons of the world, every game would be Candy Crush. It would all be Candy Crush and Ultimate Team loot boxes. Because games like Elden Ring, God of War, Hades, Squad Signalis, and many others, while more artistically worthwhile and fun, just can't bring in the same returns. Their goal is endless expansion, ever-increasing value for shareholders always and forever. The AAA industry as it stands now is not growing at a sustainable rate. It's gluttonous and short-sighted, which has resulted in the diminishing of video games as an entertainment and art. Customization, self-expression, and creation are part of playing games. They come in different forms and can take vastly different shapes, but they are not a side element that is unimportant or that games don't really need.